My name is Addison. I'm in my late 30s, a project manager by profession, and until recently, a woman who believed that if you loved someone well enough, consistently enough, quietly enough, everything else would eventually fall into place. Most people describe me the same way: calm, reasonable, low maintenance, the kind of woman who doesn't start drama, the kind who has it together. At work, I'm the steady one who keeps timelines from collapsing. In my friendships, I'm the listener. In my marriage, I thought I was the glue. I'm not loud. I don't slam doors. I don't win arguments with sharp words. And maybe because of that, I've often been underestimated. People mistake composure for compliance. They assume that if I'm not protesting, I must be fine. This story isn't about betrayal in the dramatic sense. There was no affair, no screaming match that shattered glass, no single explosive moment that made it obvious something was broken. It started with dishes. I thought marriage would make life easier until we fought about dirty dishes at midnight. That sentence sounds almost trivial, doesn't it? Almost embarrassing. Of all the things that could test a marriage, dirty dishes feel small, petty even. But love didn't disappear. Exhaustion and small daily chores slowly tested our patience. That's how it really happened. Not with fireworks, with fatigue, with the quiet arithmetic of who did what, with the invisible tally marks of who noticed and who didn't, with the subtle weight of always being the one who remembered. What I want to share with you isn't a story of revenge. It's not about proving someone wrong or exposing a villain. My husband isn't evil. I'm not a martyr. We were two decent people who slowly stopped seeing each other clearly. This is a story about roles, about how easily you can slip into one without realizing it, about how silence can look like peace when it's actually erosion, and it's about the moment I stopped reacting and started choosing. If you've ever found yourself lying awake next to someone you love, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so small could feel so heavy, then maybe you'll understand why this story matters. Before we go any further, let me introduce you to the version of me that existed before the midnight argument, before the dishes, before the midnight argument, before I understood how exhaustion can turn into distance without either person intending it. I was the reliable one. That's what my husband Daniel used to say when he introduced me to people. This is Addison. She's the organized one, the reason our life actually works. Everyone would laugh. I would smile. It sounded like a compliment. And in many ways, it was. I did keep our life working. Was running low before it became and was running low before it became an emergency. I tracked our subscriptions, our savings, our grocery list, and our shared calendar. Not obsessively, just preemptively. At work, that skill made me valuable. At home, it made me invisible. Daniel worked in marketing, creative, charismatic, spontaneous. He could walk into a room and leave with three new friends and a dinner invitation. People gravitated toward him, toward his energy, toward his ideas. They gravitated toward me when they needed something confirmed. Addison, what time are we meeting again? Addison, did we RSVP? Addison, can you send that link? I became the quiet infrastructure of every plan, and I didn't resent it, not at first, because I thought this was what partnership looked like. He was the spark, I was the structure. He dreamed big. I made the logistics real. It felt balanced in a way that made sense to me. When we first got married, I remember thinking, this will be easier now. We're a team, two adults sharing one life. I thought marriage meant shared weight. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, shared began to mean something else. When Daniel forgot to pay a bill, I covered it. When he left dishes in the sink because he was too wiped, I washed them. When he promised to call the insurance company and didn't, I did it during my lunch break. Each time it felt minor, not worth conflict, not worth tension. I told myself relationships required flexibility. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself love meant generosity. And to be clear, he wasn't cruel. He thanked me. He kissed my forehead. He'd say, I don't know what I'd do without you. That sentence should have felt romantic. Instead, sometimes it felt like a job description. The thing about being competent is that people stop checking whether you're tired. They assume you're built for carrying. If I had said, I'm overwhelmed, Daniel would have been surprised, not defensive, just confused. Because from the outside, I looked fine. I didn't complain. I didn't snap. I didn't demand. I adjusted. And every adjustment was small enough to justify. Until one night, standing barefoot in our kitchen at 12:07 a.m., staring at a sink full of dishes neither of us had touched, I realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't tired because of the dishes. I was tired of being the only one who noticed them. Looking back, I can trace the first small cut. It wasn't the midnight dishes. That was just the moment it surfaced. The first cut happened months earlier, on a Tuesday that felt entirely ordinary. I had come home after a long day of back-to-back meetings. One of my team leads had resigned unexpectedly, and I'd spent hours restructuring timelines so a product launch wouldn't collapse. My head felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath since 9 a.m. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already home. His laptop was open on the island. A half-empty smoothie glass sat beside it. The dishwasher was clean, still full. The sink, however, wasn't. There were 2 plates, a frying pan, a cutting board with dried sauce hardened into the grain, and 3 forks resting inside a cereal bowl. Not catastrophic, not overwhelming. Just there. Daniel looked up and smiled. Hey, babe, how was your day? Long, I said, dropping my bag gently by the door. Yours? Crazy. My client moved the deadline up again. I'm fried. I nodded. I understood fried. I lived there. We talked for a few minutes. I changed into sweatpants. When I came back into the kitchen, he was on the couch scrolling through something on his phone. The sink hadn't changed. I remember standing there, staring at the open dishwasher, empty slots waiting to be filled, and thinking it would take 5 minutes. 5 minutes for him, 5 minutes for me. But if I didn't do it, it would sit there until morning. And I knew that because it had before. So I rolled up my sleeves, not dramatically, not angrily, just efficiently. As I rinsed the pan, Daniel called from the living room. You didn't have to do that, you know. I paused. I know, I said. But here's what he didn't say. I'll come do it. He didn't get up. He didn't offer to switch. He didn't even register the gap between acknowledging the task and participating in it. And that was the first small cut. It wasn't about the dishes. It was about the assumption embedded in the moment that noticing meant owning, that if something needed doing and I saw it, it became mine. Later that night in bed, I replayed it. Not obsessively, just analytically, the way I analyze project timelines. If I had asked him directly, can you handle the dishes? He probably would have. But why did I have to ask? Why did my exhaustion require a formal request while his was self-evident? The next morning, everything felt normal. We drank coffee. He kissed me goodbye. The world didn't tilt, which is why no one would have marked that Tuesday as significant. But I did, because something subtle shifted in me. I realized that gratitude is not the same as partnership. Thanks for doing that is different from I'll do that. And when moments like that happen once, you let them go. When they happen twice, you rationalize. When they happen often enough, they stop feeling accidental. That Tuesday, I didn't confront him. I didn't lecture. I didn't even sigh loudly. I simply added a quiet note to myself. Pay attention, because the smallest cuts are the ones that bleed the longest. After that Tuesday, nothing exploded. That's the dangerous part. If Daniel had refused outright, if he had said, that's your job, or why are you complaining, I would have reacted. I would have drawn a line. Conflict, at least, is visible. But what we had was softer, polite, reasonable. And because it was reasonable, I kept adjusting. The dishes happened again. Not every night, just often enough. Sometimes it was laundry left unfolded in the basket for days. Sometimes it was the trash pulled out of the bin, but not replaced with a new bag. Sometimes it was mail stacked neatly on the counter instead of opened and handled. Each time Daniel would say some version of the same thing. I was going to get to it. I just needed a break. You're better at that stuff than I am. That last one always came with a half smile, like it was admiration. You're better at that stuff than I am. It sounds harmless, even complimentary. But hidden inside it is a quiet transfer of responsibility. Better meant default. Better meant mine. And here's the part I'm not proud of. I helped build that pattern. When he loaded the dishwasher inefficiently, I rearranged it silently after he walked away. When he folded towels unevenly, I refolded them so they'd fit better. When he forgot to schedule the car maintenance, I booked it without reminding him twice. I told myself I was being efficient. In reality, I was training both of us. I was teaching him that if he waited long enough or did something imperfectly enough, I would step in. Not because he manipulated me, but because I couldn't tolerate disorder. And so I became the solution. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from competence. It's not just physical, it's anticipatory. I began to anticipate messes before they happened. I'd see an empty cereal box and think, I should buy more before Saturday. I'd notice his calendar filling up and think, I should plan dinner around that. Daniel didn't see these micro calculations. Why would he? They were silent. and silence is easy to ignore. One Friday night, we had friends over. The evening was warm, easy, wine glasses clinked, laughter bounced off the walls. When everyone left, Daniel stretched and said, "That was great. I'm exhausted." "So am I," said, already gathering plates. "I'll help in the morning," he offered. It wasn't a question. It was a hopeful suggestion. I hesitated for half a second. I could feel the familiar fork in the road. Option 1, ask him to stay. Option 2, smile and say it's fine. "It's okay," I said. "Go rest." He kissed my temple and disappeared down the hallway. And I stood there alone, hands in soapy water, listening to the house settle. That was the moment I realized something uncomfortable. No one was forcing me into this role, but no one was stopping me either. And the longer I played it, the more natural it became. From the outside, we were a happy couple. No shouting, no public tension. If anything, people admired how balanced we seemed. They saw his charm. They saw my steadiness. They didn't see the invisible negotiations happening in my head every day. Is this worth mentioning? Am I overreacting? It's just dishes. It's just laundry. It's just one more thing. Disrespect rarely arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a habit. And when you normalize it long enough, you start to question whether the discomfort is even valid. I didn't feel angry yet, just slightly erased. And that feeling is easy to dismiss until it isn't. There's a moment in every long pattern when you finally see it from the outside. For me, it happened on a Sunday afternoon. We were at Daniel's sister's house for a family lunch. Kids running through the hallway. Music is playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker. His mother was calling out instructions from the kitchen in that warm but commanding tone she'd perfected over decades. I was slicing lemons for iced tea when she said casually, "Addison, can you grab more napkins? You're always so on top of these things." It wasn't criticism, it was praise. And that's what made it land. "You're always so on top of these things," Daniel's sister chimed in, laughing. Seriously, if I had Addison's brain, my life would be perfect. Everyone smiled at me like I was some kind of domestic superhero. I smiled back. But something inside me went still, because in that moment I realized something subtle and sharp. They didn't see me as a person in this family. They saw me as a function. The organizer, the smoother, the anticipator of needs. Later that afternoon, Daniel was in the backyard with his brother-in-law, talking about a potential business idea. Animated, dreaming out loud. I was inside, wiping down the counter that no one had asked me to wipe. No one told me to do it, but no one else did either. And suddenly I could see the shape of the role I'd stepped into. Reliable, useful, emotionally stable, low maintenance. The woman who keeps everything from tipping over. And the more flawlessly I performed it, the less anyone questioned whether I wanted to. That evening, driving home, Daniel reached over and squeezed my knee. "Thanks for helping out so much today. My mom loves you." "I noticed," I said softly. He glanced at me. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired." "That word again?" "Tired." It was becoming my default explanation. A safe word, a neutral word. What I didn't say was this: I don't want to be loved for how useful I am. I want to be seen for what I carry. There's a quiet loneliness in being the competent one. People assume you don't need support because you rarely drop anything. But what they don't see is how tightly you're gripping. That night, I opened my leather planner, my little structured universe, and flipped through the week ahead. Meetings, deadlines, grocery list, dentist appointment, call a plumber, renew car insurance. Daniel's name appeared only next to shared events, not next to tasks. And it wasn't because he refused. It was because I never fully handed them over. Somewhere along the way, the partnership had turned into management, and I had become the manager of our marriage. The unsettling part wasn't that he benefited from it. It was that I had agreed to it silently. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, not angry, just aware. Aware that if I kept performing this role perfectly, it would calcify. Aware that no one was going to interrupt the pattern for me. And for the first time, instead of asking, "Why doesn't he notice?" I asked something far more uncomfortable. Why have I made it so easy not to? The shift didn't happen during an argument. It didn't happen because Daniel said something cruel. It happened on a Wednesday night, in complete silence. I had worked late. Not dramatically late. Just late enough that the sky was already black when I pulled into the driveway. The house lights were on. Through the kitchen window, I could see Daniel moving around, reheating something in the microwave. When I walked in, he smiled. "Hey, I made pasta. It's on the stove." That small gesture should have felt like relief. Instead, I noticed something else. The counter was dusted with flour. The cutting board was crusted with dried sauce. A pot sat soaking in cloudy water. The trash was full, the lid slightly tilted because it wouldn't close all the way. He had cooked, and he had stopped there. We ate on the island. He told me about a client pitch that went well. I listened. I asked questions. I nodded at the right moments. But my eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen behind him. The mess wasn't catastrophic. It was predictable. After dinner, he stretched and said, "I'm wiped. I'm going to shower." And then he walked away. Not dismissively, not maliciously, just automatically. I stayed seated for a moment. This was the crossroads I knew by heart. Stand up, clean, reset the house, maintain the system. Or don't. My body felt the old reflex rising, the quiet efficiency, the mental checklist. But something inside me paused. Not angrily, not dramatically, just paused. I stood up, carried my plate to the sink, and left it there. Then I turned off the kitchen light. That was it. No confrontation, no announcement, no heavy sigh. I walked past the counter, past the soaking pot, past the full trash can, and went upstairs. In the bathroom mirror, I caught my reflection. My face looked calm, not resentful, not triumphant, just steady. For the first time, I realized something crucial. I didn't have to fight to change the dynamic. I could simply stop overcompensating. In bed, I could hear Daniel moving around downstairs, cabinets opening, water running, a faint clatter of dishes. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't enthusiastic, but it was happening. I didn't smile, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clarity. All this time, I had believed that if I didn't carry the weight, everything would collapse. But what if the collapse was necessary for recalibration? What if discomfort were information? When Daniel came upstairs, he slid into bed beside me. "Hey," he said softly, "you okay?" "I'm okay," I replied. And for once, that word meant something different. I wasn't okay because everything was handled. I was okay because I hadn't handled it. That night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I understood something that felt both empowering and unsettling. I had been confusing control with care, and if I wanted something to shift, I couldn't keep cushioning every impact. The change wasn't loud. It was a decision made in a quiet kitchen. But from that night forward, my silence wasn't automatic. It was intentional. After that Wednesday, I didn't make a speech. I didn't sit Daniel down at the kitchen table and outline a new division of labor strategy. I didn't forward him an article about emotional load or invisible labor. I simply stopped rescuing. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. If he left his coffee mug on the side table, it stayed there. If the trash filled up, I didn't quietly compress it down to buy another day. If a bill reminder popped up on our shared email and it was in his name, I let it sit. The house didn't descend into chaos, but it also didn't reset itself effortlessly anymore. And that was new. The first time Daniel noticed was on a Saturday morning. He walked into the kitchen, frowned slightly, and said, "Did we run out of clean forks?" "They're in the dishwasher," I replied, calmly sipping my coffee. "Oh," he opened it. Clean, still full. He stood there for a second. I didn't move. In the past, I would have jumped up automatically. I would have said, "Oh, I meant to empty that," even if I hadn't. Instead, I held his gaze for just a second too long. He nodded slowly and began unloading it. It wasn't dramatic, but it was different. Over the next few weeks, small moments like that accumulated. He forgot to transfer the laundry to the dryer. It sat damp overnight. I didn't fix it. He had to rewash it. He left packages by the door instead of breaking down the boxes. They stacked up. Eventually, he flattened them himself. Each time I felt the old urge to smooth, to fix, to accelerate the process. But I stayed still, not cold, not passive-aggressive, just still. And here's what fascinated me. He mistook my stillness for ease. "You seem more relaxed lately," he said one evening, almost admiringly. "I am," I answered truthfully. He interpreted my quiet as contentment. He didn't realize it was a calibration. There's a difference between silent resentment and strategic silence. Resentment simmers. Strategy observes. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't trying to create inconvenience. I was collecting information. What happens when I don't step in? How long does it take before he notices? What does he prioritize? What discomfort does he tolerate? For the first time, I was studying the system instead of sustaining it. And what I noticed was revealing. Daniel didn't ignore responsibilities because he didn't care. He ignored them because, historically, he didn't have to carry the consequence. The cost never reached him. I had always intercepted it. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, he said casually, "Hey, can you call the insurance company tomorrow? I've been meaning to." In the past, I would have said yes without hesitation. Instead, I looked at him gently and said, "You should probably handle that one. It's under your name." No accusation, no edge, just a mirror. He blinked, slightly surprised. "Oh, yeah, okay." And that was it. A small handoff. But in that moment, I felt something solidify inside me. Silence wasn't withdrawal, it was a boundary. And the more I chose it deliberately, the more I understood something uncomfortable and empowering at the same time. If someone underestimates you, sometimes it's because you've made their comfort zone too easy. I wasn't disappearing anymore. I was repositioning, and he still had no idea what was shifting beneath the surface. From the outside, nothing about our marriage looked unstable. We still hosted dinners. We still laughed at the same shows. We still curled up on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching in that absent-minded way couples do when affection has become muscle memory. Daniel told his friends I seem less stressed lately. He thought that meant things were improving. What he didn't notice was that I had stopped compensating emotionally, too. I wasn't cold. I was observant. When he vented about work, I still listened. But I stopped solving. I stopped offering strategic suggestions unless he explicitly asked. I stopped mentally reorganizing his problems before he finished describing them. And that created space. Space is uncomfortable for people who are used to being buffered. In that space, I began preparing. Not for a divorce, not for a dramatic exit. For clarity, I opened my planner one Sunday afternoon and created a new section. Not labeled escape, not labeled backup, just labeled personal. I started tracking our finances more precisely, not because I distrusted him, but because I wanted visibility. What were our shared accounts? What was the individual? What subscriptions auto-renewed? What assets were tied jointly? I realized how much of our financial structure I had set up quietly over the years. Savings allocations, emergency funds, retirement contributions. Daniel trusted me with money because I was good with numbers. He didn't notice that trust is a form of leverage. At work, I had always believed in documentation. If a project failed, the timeline would explain why. Emails would tell the story. At home, I began doing something similar. Not obsessively, not secretly, just accurately. When chores were discussed, I wrote down what we agreed to. When bills were reassigned, I noted it. When responsibilities shifted, I tracked it. Not to weaponize, to understand patterns without distortion. Because memory is emotional, documentation is neutral. I also began doing something else he didn't notice. I invested in myself quietly. I signed up for a weekend certification course related to my field, something that would increase my earning potential. I updated my resume, not to send out, just to see if it is current. I reconnected with an old colleague over coffee, someone who had once mentioned a leadership opening at her company. When Daniel asked about the course, I said, just professional development. He smiled proudly. That's awesome. You're always leveling up. Yes, I thought, I am, but not in the way you assume. The interesting thing about being underestimated is that it gives you time. When people believe you're stable, predictable, and unlikely to disrupt the system, they stop monitoring you closely. Daniel didn't sense a threat. He sensed continuity. And the more I stepped back from emotional overfunctioning, the more clearly I could see the architecture of our marriage. We weren't cruel to each other. We weren't broken. We were imbalanced. And an imbalance doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just erodes respect slowly until one person feels essential and the other feels optional. One evening, as I reviewed our monthly budget, I realized something sobering. If I needed to, I could sustain myself. Not lavishly, not effortlessly, but independently. That realization didn't make me triumphant. It made me calm, because for the first time since the midnight dishes, I wasn't reacting to frustration. I was building options. And options are powerful, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Daniel still saw me as steady, reliable, his foundation. He didn't realize foundations can relocate. And I wasn't sure yet what I would do with the clarity I was gathering. But I knew this. If a confrontation ever came, I would not be scrambling. I would be prepared. The reveal didn't come from Daniel. It came from numbers. It was a Thursday evening, raining softly against the kitchen windows. Daniel was at a networking event downtown. I had the house to myself, just the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tapping of water against glass. I opened my laptop and logged into our financial dashboard. Not suspiciously, not anxiously, just thoroughly. Over the years, I had built a system that automated most of our financial life. Joint checking for bills, separate personal accounts. Retirement contributions were deducted before we ever saw the money. A modest investment portfolio I'd set up after our wedding. Daniel knew it existed. He didn't know the details. He trusted me with the boring stuff, as he called it. That night, for the first time, I stopped looking at it as our system and started looking at it as leverage. I mapped everything clearly. Assets are in both our names. assets primarily funded by me, debts, recurring obligations, liquidity, and then I did something I had never done before. I calculated what my life would cost alone: rent in our city, utilities, groceries, insurance, healthcare, savings, margin for emergencies. I removed his income entirely from the equation. The number that stared back at me wasn't terrifying. It was tight but manageable. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a spreadsheet and a quiet exhale. For years, a subtle fear had shaped my patience. It's easier to adjust than to destabilize everything. But now I understood something fundamental. I wasn't staying because I had no choice. I was staying because I was choosing to. And choice changes posture. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle into my body. If I spoke up and he dismissed it, I could survive. If we renegotiated and he resisted, I had options. If nothing shifted at all, I wasn't trapped. The power wasn't in threatening to leave. The power was in knowing I could. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. There's a difference between endurance and agency. Endurance says, I'll manage no matter what happens. The agency says, I decide what happens next. Daniel came home around 10, slightly damp from the rain, energized from the event. You should have come, he said, kicking off his shoes. It was actually really good. I'm glad, I replied, closing my laptop. He kissed my forehead, the same familiar gesture. What were you up to? Just reviewing some things, I said. He didn't ask what. He never did. And for the first time, I noticed how much of my internal world had always been self-contained, not secretive, just unexamined by him. That night, lying in bed, I felt something new settle in my chest. Not resentment, not urgency, authority, not over him, over myself. I realized that if we were going to rebuild balance, it would have to be explicit, structured, mutual. And if he wasn't willing to engage at that level, I would no longer cushion the outcome. The dishes had started this, but this wasn't about dishes anymore. It was about value, and whether I was willing to continue donating mine quietly. I didn't celebrate my clarity. I simply accepted it. Because once you see your leverage, you can't unsee it, and the next move becomes a decision, not a reaction. It doesn't demand action immediately, it simply removes illusion. For a few weeks after my spreadsheet night, I didn't change anything outwardly. I observed. I let the new awareness settle. I wanted to be sure I wasn't reacting to temporary frustration. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Long relationships accumulate seasons. Not every imbalance requires a revolution, but patterns do require decisions. The real decision point came on a Sunday evening. We had just finished dinner. Daniel had cooked again, something elaborate, something Instagram-worthy. He was proud of it. I was genuinely impressed. After we ate, he leaned back in his chair and said, smiling, You've got cleanup, right? I cook. It was light, playful, but it was automatic. I looked at the kitchen. The counter was dusted with spices. The cutting board was streaked with oil. The pot is already crusting at the bottom, and something inside me went very still. Not angry, just finished. Actually, I said calmly, I think we should talk about that. He blinked. About dishes? About how things are divided. He laughed lightly, as if this were charming. Babe, we're good. It's not that deep. There it was. Not dismissal with cruelty. Dismissal with minimization. We're good. It's not that deep. For him, it wasn't. For me, it was cumulative. I felt two options open in front of me. Option 1. Let it go again. Return to silent recalibration. Continue managing the system with slightly firmer boundaries. Option 2. Make the invisible visible. But making it visible meant risk. Because once you articulate an imbalance, you can't retreat into comfort without cost. I folded my hands on the table. It is that deep for me, I said evenly. He straightened slightly. The smile faded. Not defensively, just uncertainly. What do you mean? And in that moment, I understood something crucial. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about setting a standard. I could continue adjusting indefinitely. I had proven that. Or I could redefine the structure of our marriage explicitly and accept whatever that revealed. The irreversible choice wasn't divorce. It was honesty without cushioning. I feel like I carry more of the daily load than you realize, I said. Not occasionally, structurally. He frowned. I help. I know, I replied. But helping isn't the same as sharing. The room didn't explode. There was no shouting. Just tension, quiet, unfamiliar. And I realized that this was the real pivot. Not whether he washed the dishes, but whether he was willing to examine the architecture with me. Because if he wasn't, then I already knew I could walk away standing. That knowledge made my voice steady. I don't want to resent you, I continued, so we need to rebalance this intentionally. He was silent for a long moment, processing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't smoothing the discomfort. I was letting it sit between us. And that was the decision. Not to threaten, not to dramatize, but to stop carrying the imbalance quietly. Whatever happened next would reveal whether we were truly partners or just comfortable. After that Sunday conversation, something subtle shifted in the air between us. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't storm off. He also didn't immediately transform. Instead, he said, "Okay, so what does rebalance look like?" It was a reasonable question, and this time I was ready for it. Not emotionally, structurally. "I think we need defined ownership," I said. "No help, not reminders, ownership." He nodded slowly, still processing. So, we sat down at the dining table with my planner between us. I wrote categories: groceries, cooking, cleanup, laundry, bills, appointments, household maintenance, social planning. Seeing it all listed out changed something, even for him. "That's a lot," he admitted quietly. "Yes," I said, "no edge, just a fact." We divided it. Not perfectly evenly at first, but intentionally. Some tasks shifted entirely to him: utilities, car maintenance, half of the weekly cooking, full cleanup on his cooking nights, social coordination for his side of the family. And here's what mattered most: I stopped tracking his tasks for him. If the electricity bill due date approached, I didn't check. If the oil change reminder appeared, I forwarded it once and left it there. At the same time, I did something else quietly. I separated a portion of my paycheck into an individual high-yield savings account under my name only, not hidden, not secret, just independent. I updated beneficiaries on my retirement accounts, reviewed our lease terms, checked credit reports. Not because I had decided to leave, because I had decided never to be unprepared again. Daniel noticed some of the shifts. "You've been really organized lately," he said one evening. I almost smiled at the irony. "I always have been," I replied. The difference now was that my organization no longer centered on preserving his comfort. It centered on protecting my agency. At first, he followed through carefully, almost enthusiastically. The novelty of ownership made him attentive. He paid the bills early. He handled the car appointment without prompting. He even reorganized the garage one Saturday. But patterns are deeper than good intentions. 1 month later, I received a late fee notification for a utility bill in his name. In the past, I would have quietly transferred money and fixed it. This time, I forwarded the email. "Looks like this slipped," I wrote. Neutral, no commentary. He came into the kitchen 10 minutes later, frustrated with himself. "I can't believe I missed that." I met his eyes. "It happens." And I left it there. No rescuing, no absorbing. He paid the fee. And for the first time, he felt the cost directly. Not because I punished him, because I stopped intercepting consequences. That's when I understood something powerful. Change doesn't require volume. It requires consistency. I didn't need to threaten divorce papers to be taken seriously. I needed to remove myself from the role of silent insurance policy. And as weeks passed, the system began recalibrating, sometimes smoothly, sometimes awkwardly. But underneath it all, I held something steady inside myself. If this works, it will be mutual. If it doesn't, I will still be standing. And for the first time in our marriage, that truth didn't scare me. It strengthened me. At first, the changes felt almost refreshing. Daniel was more alert, more engaged. He double-checked due dates. He asked clarifying questions about shared expenses. He even started using the calendar app instead of relying on me to summarize the week for him. On the surface, it looked like growth, and in some ways it was. But consequences don't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes they arrive as discomfort. About 6 weeks into our new structure, I noticed something subtle in him. I was no longer anticipating his stress. When he had a big presentation coming up, I didn't pre-adjust our schedule to accommodate it. I didn't quietly make sure the house was extra calm. I didn't pick up his dry cleaning without being asked. Not out of spite, out of equality. He began to feel the friction of managing both his work and his share of our life. One Thursday night, he came home visibly tense. "Can you just handle dinner?" he asked, dropping his bag. I'm slammed. In the past, I would have pivoted instantly. This time, I glanced at the calendar. "It's your night," I said gently, "but we can order something if you want." He exhaled sharply, not angry, just strained. "It feels like everything's harder lately." I looked at him carefully. "For you?" I asked. The question wasn't sarcastic. It was clarifying. He ran a hand through his hair. "No, I mean, I don't know. There's just more to think about." And there it was. More to think about. The invisible load had become visible, at least to him. Not because I explained it better. Because I stopped absorbing it. Over time, his initial enthusiasm softened into realism. He missed another small deadline. He forgot to confirm dinner with his sister, which led to an awkward last-minute scramble. Previously, those social oversights would have landed on me. Now they landed where they originated. One evening, after realizing he'd double booked himself, he sat down heavily on the couch. I feel like I'm constantly catching up, he admitted. I sat across from him, calm. That's how I felt, I said. Not accusatory, not triumphant, just honest. He looked at me differently then, not defensively, but thoughtfully. For the first time, he wasn't just hearing my words. He was experiencing the weight behind them. Consequences aren't about suffering. They're about awareness, and awareness can be destabilizing. Because once you see the imbalance, you can't pretend it's natural. There were no explosive fights during this period, no slammed doors, just small recalibrations, awkward pauses, moments where he hesitated before assuming something would be handled. And something else began to shift too. He started asking before defaulting. Are you okay with taking this on? Can we switch this week? Did I miss anything? Those questions weren't perfect solutions, but they were recognized. Still, recognition doesn't erase history overnight. Trust and balance takes time. And even as things improved structurally, something inside me remained cautious. Because I had learned something irreversible. I could function without being indispensable. And once you stop being indispensable, the relationship changes. Not louder, just deeper. The consequences weren't dramatic. They were subtle. He felt the weight I had carried. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Space. But space can either bring people closer or reveal how far apart they've quietly drifted. We were about to find out which one it would be. There's a fragile window in any recalibration, a period where both people are adjusting, testing new ground, and figuring out whether the structure can actually hold. For a while, Daniel tried. He really did. But effort born from realization is different from effort born from conviction. One Friday evening, about 3 months into our new arrangement, I came home to silence. The lights were off except for the living room lamp. Daniel was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Hey, I said softly. He didn't look up right away. I forgot to transfer the rent, he said. It was due that morning. A late fee had already posted. In the old version of us, this would never have happened. I would have scheduled it automatically, double-checked the balance, and made sure everything cleared. Now it had landed fully in his hands. I'll fix it, he added quickly. I don't know how you kept track of everything. I set my bag down slowly. I wrote it down, I said, and I carried it. He finally looked at me then, and there was something new in his expression. Not frustration, not defensiveness, regret. I didn't realize, he said quietly. I thought we were just functioning. We were, I replied, because I was overfunctioning. The word hung between us. Overfunctioning. He leaned back against the couch, eyes unfocused. I feel like I'm failing all the time now, he admitted, like I'm constantly behind. And for a moment, I felt the old reflex stir. Comfort him, absorb it, tell him it's okay. But this wasn't about soothing anymore. It was about truth. You're not failing, I said calmly. You're adjusting to reality. That reality had always existed. He just hadn't been fully exposed to it. The next few weeks were tense in a quiet way. Not hostile. Heavy. He became more self-critical, more aware of each mistake. He apologized more frequently for things that used to go unnoticed. And then one night, after another small oversight, an insurance payment processed late, he said something that shifted the ground beneath us. I don't know if I'm built for this level of structure, he said. It wasn't laziness. It was discomfort with sustained responsibility. And in that moment, I understood something painful and clarifying. Balance isn't just about dividing tasks. It's about shared standards. If my baseline expectation for adulthood felt overwhelming to him, then this wasn't a temporary growing pain. It was a philosophical gap. I don't want to feel like I'm being evaluated all the time, he added quietly. I'm not evaluating you, I said. I'm just no longer compensating. Silence. That's when it hit me. He missed the version of me who made his life smoother without asking him to grow. And I could never go back to being her. Not because I was angry, because I had seen too much. Once awareness settles in, reverting feels like self-erasure. And I think he sensed that. I don't want to lose us over logistics, he said one night, almost pleading. It was never about logistics, I answered. It was about value, about whether partnership meant comfort or contribution. We weren't shouting. We weren't threatening. But something irreversible had already happened. He now understood the weight I had carried. And I now understood that he hadn't chosen it consciously. But understanding doesn't automatically create compatibility. Sometimes realization arrives after the foundation has already cracked. And the hardest truth isn't that someone did something terrible. It's that they can't meet you where you now stand. The final conversation didn't happen at midnight. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. There was sunlight coming through the blinds, striping the dining table in soft gold. No raised voices, no dramatic prelude. Daniel was already sitting there when I walked in, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't sipped from. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and sat across from him. There was no tension in my chest anymore. No adrenaline, just clarity. "I've been thinking," he began carefully, "about what you said, about overfunctioning." He paused, choosing his words. "I didn't ask you to carry all of it, but I also didn't stop you." "That's true," I said. He looked up at me, searching for anger. He didn't find any. "I don't want you to feel alone in this," he continued, "but I also feel like I'm constantly trying to catch up to a standard I didn't even realize existed." His honesty didn't feel defensive. It felt exposed. "I don't want to compete with you," he added, "or feel measured." I folded my hands calmly on the table. "I don't want to measure you," I said. "I want to rely on you." That was the difference. Reliance requires consistency, not perfection. Consistency. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I naturally operate the way you do." "I know," I replied gently. And that was the moment everything became simple. Not easy, simple. This wasn't about whether he loved me. He did. This wasn't about whether I loved him. I did. It was about alignment. For years, I had minimized my need for structure because I thought love meant flexibility. But what I needed wasn't flexibility. It was a partnership at the same altitude. "I can keep adjusting," he said almost quietly. "I can try harder." I believed him. But I also understood something deeper. Trying harder isn't the same as being fundamentally compatible. "I don't want you to become someone else to stay with me," I said. "And I don't want to shrink to stay comfortable." No tears spilled dramatically. No one stormed away. We sat there in the soft morning light, two adults recognizing a truth without heat. "I think we built something functional," I continued, "but not sustainable." He swallowed, nodding faintly. "So what are you saying?" he asked. And I answered without shaking. "I'm saying I don't want to keep teaching someone how to carry life with me." The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was final. There was sadness, of course there was. But there was no rage, because this wasn't betrayal. It was divergence. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't cushioning the truth to make it easier to digest. I was simply stating it. Calmly, completely. It has been a year since that Sunday morning. There was no dramatic implosion afterward. No legal warfare. No scorched earth. We separated with paperwork, with quiet conversations, with a division of assets that reflected exactly what we had built: calm, methodical, respectful. Some friends were shocked. "But you two were so stable," one of them said. We were. Stability, I've learned, is not the same as alignment. I moved into a smaller apartment across the city. It has wide windows and fewer cabinets. The first night I slept there, the silence felt unfamiliar, but not lonely, just honest. I still carry my leather planner. I still color code my weeks. I still anticipate deadlines before they arrive. The difference is this: I no longer apologize for the way I'm built. For a long time, I believed my structure made me rigid, that my need for shared responsibility made me demanding, that wanting a partnership at the same altitude was somehow unreasonable. It isn't. I don't feel bitter toward Daniel. I feel grateful for the clarity. We speak occasionally, logistically, politely. There's no hostility, just the distance that makes sense now. Sometimes I think about the midnight dishes that started all of this. How trivial it sounded, how small it looked from the outside. But it was never about porcelain and soap. It was about noticing, about whether two people see the same mess at the same time and feel equally responsible for clearing it. I've dated since then, carefully, not urgently. And now, when I sit across from someone new, I don't watch how charming they are in a room. I watch what they notice. Do they refill the water pitcher without being asked? Do they remember what they committed to? Do they treat shared space like shared responsibility? These details used to feel minor. Now I know they are architecture. I am still calm, still steady, still not the loudest person in the room, but there is something different in my posture. I don't overextend to prove love. I don't compensate to avoid discomfort. And I don't confuse endurance with devotion. Who I am now is not harder, just clearer. I am a woman who knows the cost of carrying too much quietly, and I am a woman who knows she can stand alone without collapsing. There is power in that, not aggressive power, not vengeful power, just quiet dominance, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. It simply refuses to disappear. If you had told me years ago that my marriage would unravel over something as ordinary as dirty dishes, I would have laughed. Not because it was impossible, because it sounded insignificant. But that's the lesson, isn't it? It's rarely the headline moments that redefine a relationship. It's the daily ones, the invisible arithmetic of who notices, who initiates, who carries, who adjusts. Love doesn't usually disappear in a single argument. It erodes when imbalance becomes normal. And here's what I've learned. Something I wish someone had told me earlier. If you are always the one anticipating, organizing, smoothing, remembering, you may not be better at it. You may simply be the only one treating it as a shared responsibility. There's nothing wrong with being capable. There's nothing wrong with being structured, reliable, steady. But capability becomes self-erasure when it goes unacknowledged and unreciprocated. The quietest form of resentment isn't anger. It's exhaustion. And exhaustion, left unspoken, eventually turns into distance. I didn't leave because Daniel was cruel. I left because I realized I had been negotiating against myself for years. And once I stopped cushioning the imbalance, the truth surfaced gently but clearly. Partnership requires more than affection. It requires aligned standards of adulthood. If you're watching this and thinking, it's just chores, I understand. I used to think that too. But ask yourself this, when something small keeps bothering you, is it really small? Or is it symbolic? Is it about the dish in the sink? Or about whether someone sees it without being asked? I don't believe in dramatic revenge arcs. I believe in clarity. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop overfunctioning and observe what remains. So I want to leave you with a question. In your relationship, are you sharing the weight or silently carrying it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story felt familiar in any way, maybe it's not about dishes at all.